Catch up.
Okay, when Daniel chapter 1, I'll read the first couple of verses. And it, excuse me.
I said wise.
In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put it in the treasure house of his God. We're going to stop there for a few moments. Verse 2 tells us that he plundered the temple of God in Jerusalem. And I think the next siege or the final attack he did on a couple years later, they pretty much leveled the city, leveled the temple, and they took all the temple articles. Now, that's done in the ancient world. It's done for two reasons. But why do you think it would be done, first of all? Why would they plunder the temple? What's in there that's so valuable?
They want the gold and the brass and all that,
Silver? Yeah.
silver, all of it, jewels. I'm sure there were jewels there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how they would have polished them that far back, but that and the removing the, for lack for a better word in my vocabulary, the icons of God to take away their power from any power they possibly could still have over the Babylonians.
Okay. You hit on two of them. The material value of the objects. It's a psychological thing as well. If they trusted in their God, which if you read the prophecy of Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, you find him saying, just because you have your temple of God, temple of Yahweh, doesn't mean he's going to protect you if you sin. Okay? And there's another reason, a third reason, and that is that the ancient people who said in the past, most of them believe that there are many gods, and these gods were regional. They covered certain areas, and that's pretty much it. So when you conquered a place, you took their gods, or their implements that they used to worship their God. That showed two things in the mind of the ancient people. First, they humiliated your God. Okay. Secondly, they conquered your God. Your God is weak. Our God, in this case, Marduk, the leader of the Babylonian god.
That sounds too much like Marmaduke.
Marmaduke, yeah. But the same mentality. And Marduk, sometimes called Baal, maybe that's a better name. But so he's the winner in this battle. Yahweh, the only true God, in the minds of even many of the Jews, perhaps, but certainly in the minds of Babylonians and surrounding countries, Yahweh is weak. He may have been strong back when he brought the people out of Egypt. He may have been strong when he collapsed the walls of Jericho. He may have, but he lost it all. Okay? So that's part of the psychological thing. You've defeated their God because back in the ancient world, your God marched ahead of you. Your God gave you victory.
So did they know that the only reason why they conquered it was because
Well, we're going to
their
look at that.
God?
Why would God allow that? When all through both the Old and New Testament, he tells us to give him glory. He tells us to be his witnesses. He tells us to share his message. Okay?
Well, there's more than one message.
They strayed too far away and wouldn't return.
Okay. Many of them refuse to return. Yeah.
It's kind of like what we got in this country right now. So many people either do not believe, or they believe and they don't even care. They care less. They want nothing to do with it. And inhibits their ability to do what they want to do if they adhere to his principles. And so we are left with a majority of people who are corrupt. And that is probably why we have such corrupt government.
We're getting what we deserve.
Yes, it's like whenever they wanted, insisted on a king to rule them, say, okay, you want a king here, I'll give you what you people are all about. And then he gave them Saul.
Yep. Saul, the tribe of Benjamin. And it's interesting. I'm reading a book, and it was written back end of the 20th century. It's still pretty up to date. Our nation's going into pantheism. It's going into karma and all these Eastern beliefs, and it's crazy.
Hmm.
It's crazy what some people believe. You ever hear Shirley MacLaine and some of these other people? And Americans tend to listen to people who are, quote, successful,
Hmm.
wealthy,
Mhm.
or successful in some endeavor, celebrities. Okay, unfortunately, yeah, America's. I hate
Yes.
to say it, but it's getting what it deserves. And part of what you said, G. Campbell Morgan agrees with you. He says in one of his commentaries, it's not the resurrection, it's not the incarnation, the miraculous that scares people away. Some people, he said, they just don't want to live by the standard that God sets. God has a standard of holiness, righteousness, and they don't want to live by that. They want to pursue whatever they want to pursue. Because if you accept the God of the Bible, then you're not going to be a dishonest businessman. Okay? You're not going to cheat on your taxes or
They call that good business now.
Yeah.
Being deceptive. And that's how most of them, 90, I don't know what the percentage is, but the very high majority of them, that's how they acquire their wealth, through deception and thievery.
or poorly made object that's sold for top dollar.
To me, that's thievery. That's the same thing as thievery.
Now, there's more reasons too, though. We said last week in our introduction that 3 times in here, Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges the God of Daniel as the God. Now, we probably won't get there the first time. Tonight it's in chapter 2. Pretty far into chapter 2.
Wouldn't that be confusing for him?
Explore that.
Well, you look at it, okay? So whatever they consider their God, they can conquer them. With Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, with all that going on, wouldn't that be confusing for Nebuchadnezzar? Because he see all that stuff, and he knows that they came from Judah. He knows that, so I mean, I think that would be confusing. Like, that would be.
But being a human being, he's probably rational.
One more weapon in his arsenal. It's probably the way he looked at it. I mean, he's more powerful than all of them. Boy, I got quite a collection now.
In chapter 2, he'll have his dream. And the magicians, astrologers, the wise men of Babylon will say, well, O king, tell us the dream and we'll interpret it for you. And he'll say, no, you tell me the dream and then you interpret it. And several different reasons why he may have done that.
Then he'll know that. Then he said that. He says, you tell me the dream, then I know that you're able to interpret it and you won't basically lie to me.
That's one of the reasons. Yep. So, yeah, the hand of God does it. And if you want to liken it to America again, we have people in America who believe in God, they trust in God up to a point. Okay, these fellows believe in their pagan gods. They help us interpret the dream, but we've never heard of any God that will tell you the dream. Okay, so I'll trust you, God, up to a point, but comes a point where I'm not sure you're trustworthy. Okay, remember there's a Jewish rabbi back in the part of the 20th century, I can't remember his name. His son died with a miserable death, and it made him question his theology. And he wrote a book And basically, I guess it says in the Ezekiel book that Yahweh, the God that's used, is mighty, but he's not almighty. There's some things he can't do. Okay?
Mm,
So I'll trust you a certain distance, but after that, I guess I'm on my own. Right? Sad. So maybe in part God allows Jerusalem to fall, certainly because of their sin, as mentioned earlier, but also maybe he had designs on Nebuchadnezzar, most powerful man on the planet, as far as we know, at least in what we call the biblical world. Okay, most powerful man, and hey, I'm gonna give the boy a chance to come on over. Maybe. Now these four young men, because it's Daniel and his three friends,
Do you think he actually did it, Dan?
we're looking at when we get to the third one. Scholars, some scholars say yes, he did. Some say no, he just accepted Yahweh as one among many. Isn't that what Naaman did? The leper, remember?
mm,
He goes to, was it Elijah? And he's healed. And he says to Elijah, do you mind if I take a bunch of your dirt home so that I can sacrifice to Yahweh, the great God? But you don't think Yahweh would mind, do you, when my boss, the king, goes to sacrifice the moon rock, I think was his God, and he leans on my shoulder? That's a compromise. Now maybe God accepted it from these pagan Gentile. Certainly accepted the God of Israel, but like we said Sunday in the message, the two greatest declarations of faith were by two women who left everything behind. Their people, their religion, everything to go. Yes. And Nebuchadnezzar made a fantastic declaration of faith later on. And so did Naaman. But they didn't leave anything behind, really. Okay? They continued living among the people they grew up with and to some extent acknowledging the existence of these other gods. So where does God draw the line? And also,
mm,
and I think we more or less touched on this, these four young men, Daniel and his three friends, would testify about their God throughout their career there. And indeed, not only Nebuchadnezzar, but everybody else would say, no, we conquered their God, and yet their God can do in our area what Marduk, the great Marduk, can't do. Marduk was made head of the gods because, if you remember, I shared with you some time ago, the first gods, the beginning gods that created, supposedly, at least existed, had these rebellious children gods and decided they were going to destroy them. And so the children gods rebel against the senior gods, and they choose Marduk as their champion. Marduk kicks tail. He creates, I think, the world out of the carcass of his mother, maybe, or some ancient god, and so he's made head god, very powerful god that wants to be God, not like Satan. But here, these four men, very devout Jews, from the very heartland of Marduk. But Marduk reigns supreme, and yet he can't do it, but Yahweh does. And so there's a testimony here throughout these historical chapters, which usually comprise the first 6 chapters. So for whatever reason, God allows his people to be conquered. Now, 2 Kings, it's chapter 25, we're not going to read it. I'm going to put that out in my notes. But there, where Nebuchadnezzar finally conquers Jerusalem, the final time when he sends his troops in, they destroy the city, more or less. They've only 4 people left there. He takes all the stuff out of the temple. Okay? He destroys it. And there's not much left of it. They sent it around, at least for many decades. He takes Marduk and Marduk wins. But in 2 Kings, it gives several reasons why God allowed that. One, they did not observe his 7-year Sabbath. They There's no evidence there. There's no Jubilee.
That's what you're saying, that was one that they never, there was never any Jubilee.
Some writers will say, well, yeah, they observed Jubilee. There's no biblical or historical evidence that they ever did.
And it is after the 6th year. No, that's what you already said.
Now the 7th year is set.
Yeah. But there was something else too.
Somewhere, I think that 25th chapter, it tells the Jews, basically they didn't follow the entire Mosaic law. They're like some so-called Christians pussyfoot around with God. And dangerous thing to do. God is patient. But, there's a limit. He gives different reasons why he let them be defeated. Yet God has shown his favor to these 4 young lads. Now, in this chapter, let's read on. Read verses 3 to, where's your diet start? Through 7.
Then the king ordered, I have no idea how to say this.
Espinaz.
Yeah, that
You've been the rest of us.
chief of his court officials to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and of nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel he called Belshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, and Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego.
Kevin, read verses 8 through 16.
But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food, nor with the wine he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him to not defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. The chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. And Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuch had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. And let our appearance and appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with the servant according to what you see. So he listened to them in this manner and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine they would drink and gave them the vegetables.
There's at least 2 signs here of God's favor for these 4 lads. They're young men. They're not little kids. One is they survived. Great king and his army surround Jerusalem. The final siege, I think, was about 2 years long. I think that was the first siege. And Zedekiah, who's king, They, he and his army tried to escape the city. Didn't worry about the people that come along. Okay. Wonderful rules. Well, they caught up, the Babylonians caught up with Zedekiah, the king, and his family. They put his boys alongside him and murdered each one, executed him right in front of his eyes, and they put his eyes out. Okay. So these four lads, they were related. The Jewish historian Josephus, who lived during the time of St. Paul, says that they were relatives to the king, to Zedekiah. They escaped. That's the first sign of God's favor. God has a purpose for them, and they're devout. And Zedekiah, from what I read of him, fair weather worshiper. The second one is that Ashpenaz is told to rename them, which he does. We'll look at that in a few moments, and to give them a certain diet to eat from the king's table. Okay. Well, there's difficulties with that if you're devout Jew. What would be the difficulty? Now, this doesn't mean you're going to eat the meal with the king. Okay. You're going to be given a ration from his table, so to speak, his resources. Basically means you're living off the state, off the king and his budget. He has you in his budget. But what's the problem there about Jewish lad? The food's probably decent.
Back then they didn't eat meat.
Hmm?
Back then, Jewish people didn't eat meat.
Well, they eat meat, just certain meat.
Yeah, that's
Couldn't have pork, couldn't have catfish or rabbit. I don't know if they ate those things anyway, they would have eaten pork. But certain animals you didn't eat is part of the problem. Secondly, the meat, if you did eat it, would have been sacrificed on a pagan altar. They had problems with that even in the New Testament, remember? Romans, I think, 14. And then the wine, there's no prohibition in the Old Testament about drinking wine, but they don't want you to get drunk. But the wine, some of that wine would have been poured out on the heathen temple, or the heathen altar, heaven altar. And so they don't want to defile themselves. And so they asked this fellow. Now, from what we read here, this guy's worried about his life, is Ashpenaz. And as we go through the historical section of Daniel, we're going to see why. It was a basket case. Brilliant man. Great strategy, military strategist, great builder. He literally rebuilt Babylon. His father, Nabopolassar, remember we mentioned last week, his father was made governor over the Assyrian part of the empire that included Babylon. He rebels, and Babylon is not all that great at that point. His son, Nebuchadnezzar, would do some military battles while his dad's still alive. But when he takes over, he almost literally rebuilt Babylon, much as Octavian, Caesar Augustus did with Rome. Octavian said, I found Rome of brick, I left it of marble. Well, Nebuchadnezzar did much the same, and we looked at some of the stuff last week that he did. So this guy, with all his good points, he's a basket case, guys. We're going to see that. He explodes almost at a moment's notice. You don't want to argue with him. So Ashpenaz says, look, boys, you're wonderful lads. I love you. You're just wonderful, but, my life's on the line. God gave these boys favor with this man. And so he says, okay, we'll try it. We'll try for a few days, 10 days, verse 15. And it says at the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate their royal food. Now again, doesn't mean they hobnobbed with the king and ate at his table. They were beneath him in that respect.
Just look healthier.
Yeah. But they would have got much of the same food, perhaps. When we look at that diet, you see just what it was that they were given. It won't surprise you. And then the third reason, verse 18, which we didn't read, at the end of the time set by the king to bring them into the service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. So, if I understand that correctly, these 4 lads, at the end of the 3-year trial period, uh, the trial period for the
3 years.
was 10 days with food, then 3 years for the training period, probationary period. Okay, they were better than even the old magicians. And we'll look at some of the stuff that they had to deal with in that respect. But this is God's favor. Now you're just recently brought into Babylon. The language that they spoke would have been very close to your language, the everyday language. The scholarly language, though, was very ancient. And it goes back, I think, to Sumer. And if they had to learn that would have been pretty tough, which maybe they did. These were very intelligent lads. But at the end of 3 years, they seem to know more, have a better grasp than the old fellows waiting for retirement, so to speak. So God has shown them favor. In fact, it says 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters of his whole kingdom. So we see God working on their behalf. You have to wonder, though, I can't find any evidence one way or the other if there are other Jewish lads taken. I think there probably were. And there may have been other ones selected, but if so, they don't seem to have gone along with Daniel and his 3 friends. If we can judge by the absence of that,
Might explain the jealousy.
and there will be jealousy throughout. Yeah.
Probably explain the jealousy because they were so faithful to God, and God made sure they were promoted and they were held in high esteem. Whereas the other ones, they probably were jealous because, they didn't hold fast to, their way, the way they were supposed to live their life.
And jealousy was the rationale for jealousy is there, and we're seeing more of it in chapter 2 at the end. Especially, I think, with the older magi. Magi was the word for the wise men and so forth. And by the time we get to the book of Acts and New Testament, it's taken on a very negative connotation. But let's look at the assimilation. We mentioned that last week. They're taken from their homeland and they're thrust into this different culture, radically different. Back home, we only worship one God, the living God, true God. We only learn on our mama's knees. Here, there's a multiplicity of deities, a pantheon, a collection of deities. And some deities being more powerful than others. This one might be said to upset, that one isn't. And not that that concerns you a whole lot, except that you're living in a fishbowl. Okay? So they want to assimilate these men. One way is the renaming. I think we looked at that last week. I don't have it in my notes from last week. They're given names that their Jewish names honor God. Somewhere or another, either Yahweh or Elohim is in there. And so they're honoring God. These new names don't.
No, I remember you saying Daniel's was Nebuchadnezzar's God. He was named after Nebuchadnezzar's
Or Bel.
God.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they're all going to bear within the new names, the name of some Babylonian god. So that's one way of assimilation. We're going to have you, to a certain extent, forget your culture, forget your God, because now you're part of our culture. Now you're advising the king, the pagan, and you're going to have to know something about our God. So forget about your God. Now, as we go through there, we're going to see that they don't. And this actually helps Nebuchadnezzar. And he starts leaning towards, we're going to see a process of Nebuchadnezzar. And at the end of that process, the third declaration of faith, we're sit and maybe argue or debate, did he really accept Yahweh? But there's a process here. Okay? How many times did we have to hear the gospel before we finally succumbed, before we finally fell at the cross and accepted Christ. For some of us, it was years. For some people, their testimony is first time they heard the gospel, woo, glory, they accepted Jesus. It has been true in my life. It wasn't. Probably many of our life. So the first part of the process of assimilation is name. Now I bear the name of the God of Nebuchadnezzar. Whether it's Baal, the same as Marduk, or his son, I think his son's Marduk's son's name, one of the Jewish lads had him in his Babylonian name. But the other one is a bit more subtle, the diet. Okay? I own you people, is Nebuchadnezzar's thinking. Because first of all, I conquered you and I conquered your God, your weak God. I brought you into my land, but God didn't stop that. I gave you new names, which shows my authority over you, but also to give, for a king to give somebody a new name, also in his mind controls your destiny. You would do as I say, you would live as long as I want you to live, and you behave yourself. So, but here it's a bit more subtle. I'll have you eat my food, the same food I'm eating. Now, for a lot of pagans from other countries, that may not hurt too much. Okay, and besides, if you believe your God was conquered, these four lads did not. But if you believe your God was conquered, so what? If I follow his God, I'm in Babylon. I'm not in Moab anymore, or Edom, or Assyria, Asher, Nineveh, none of those places where their gods didn't help me much. Anyway, now I'm in Babylon. So when in Babylon, the Babylonians do eat their food, worship their gods. Okay? And
See where that got them ones, the ones that thought that way.
one writer, I think it was Walton, and there's three authors of that historical commentary, seems to think that maybe, just maybe, the food was not so disagreeable to Jewish religion. He says that the actual wording used here means grains or seeds that you give your animals. Now that's not so bad because that's what they give soldiers as well, the ration that they would give a soldier in their army. And so it didn't come prepared, you prepare it yourself. You want to cook it, you can bake it, you can do whatever you want to do. You want to feed it like a horse and chaw on it, that's fine. But what they would do, grind it and mix it and so forth. But he said, if that's the case, or if it's just the delicacies, some writers say it was the delicacies of the king's table, either way, Daniel and the lads said, we won't be assimilated. We don't want your food. They just give us vegetables. Veggies aren't so bad. Okay. I'm not going to eat your meat. Give us veggies and water. So really what it sounds like is they didn't want the meat because of being unclean and sacrificed to pagan altars. And the wine, again, there's no prohibition in the New Testament against drinking wine, but they would pour some of that on the pagan altar for the sacrifice. And so they wanted to keep some measure of their national identity. I remember the great migrations in American history. Okay? We expected them to become our idea of what an American is, and many of them did. But still, they tell you in Queens, New York, if you want a certain kind of food, from anywhere in the world, you can find a restaurant that serves it. They refused to be totally assimilated into American culture. We still see that happening today. Whether we agree with illegal immigration or not, probably most of us don't. But, so they wanted to keep their national identity. Nebuchadnezzar says, no, erase it. Now you're mine. You belong to me, the Babylonian, and you eat what I eat, and you go the names that I give you. Right? You know, that one of the interesting things about this diet is there's a thing today called the Daniel diet, the Daniel fast, and the Daniel diet fast. Yeah. And they get it from here. Whether it actually works or not, I don't know. Now, theirs worked in 10 days. I don't know if any diet in just 10 days is going to make me lose weight or bring me closer to God. Now, the proponents of that diet, from what I read, at one time it was pretty popular in Christianity. I don't know if it still is. But some did it for weight loss. Now, if you prolong that diet, you're going to lose weight. Okay? Well, you eat vegetables, vegetarian. Whether that's actually going to bring you closer to God, to be more attentive to Him, I don't know. Fasting can, but this wasn't actually what we think of as fasting. But, I don't know if it's still practiced or not.
I know Living Water does every year, at the beginning of the year, they do, shortly after the beginning of the year, they do the annual fast
Okay, how long?
till Passover, I think.
And some do it during Lent.
That might be when it is, like during
Oh,
that
okay.
time. I'm not real sure. I know it's shortly after the new year starts, but I'm not sure like how long after. I tried it. It lasted about a day and I got sick. Diabetic.
Yeah, so they say it makes you more sensitive to God. And maybe that, if you're used to eating whatever you want, okay, whenever you want, yeah, I guess this would make you more sensitive to something.
Oh, I've been just stupid making taking my diabetic medication. Not really eating. So my sugar was really, really, really low.
Yeah. I don't want to try it. I like my veggies, but a little bit of meat kind of helps too.
So also nuts. Eat nuts.
Yeah, you can eat almost anything other than, I think they rule out meat and
Eggs. Milk.
you so it eliminates animal products in favor of vegetables and there's absolutely no alcohol. Now, in the last verse of this chapter, Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. Daniel was served Babylon and Persia. Cyrus is the king of Persia. The Medes and Persians were conquered.
Cyrus was the one that was ruling whenever Daniel was thrown in the lion's den, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, who's tripping there? There's an interesting point there, and we'll do it again, but um, Nebuchadnezzar was absolute ruler, had absolute power, whereas the Persian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the king, if he passed a law, he couldn't go against it, even his own law. Whereas Nebuchadnezzar, he could do what his own law pleased. Nobody's going to argue. He had absolute power. The Persian monarchs did not. And we'll see that when we come to that chapter. I think King James says when they approached Cyrus, whatever name they give him,
King of Persia.
yeah, the emperor, they say, remember you passed that law that we asked you to, and nobody could pray to anybody but you for 30 days? Well, Daniel, your buddy over there. And they say the law of the Medes and the Persians would change it, alter it not. You couldn't change it. And that's why Daniel was thrown in there. And what we see is a decline of authority in these empires. But he serves into the reign of Cyrus. So he's there 65 years at least. Some say 65, some a few years longer. So the interesting thing here is, guys, Cyrus is the one that will let the Jews go back to Jerusalem, rebuild. It'll happen a bit more under one of his successors. Daniel would live to see the first wave of Jews go back to Jerusalem. But he wouldn't go.
Isn't that whenever Esther became queen
That's a bit
around that
later.
time?
That's a Ahasuerus.
Ahasuerus or something like that.
I think he's Xerxes. He's a future king at this point.
Oh, okay.
To Cyrus. There's, I think, 2 or 3 deportations back to Jerusalem. The first one, at least the first one, maybe on the second, I don't know. But the first one, Daniel would live to see that happen. In fact, we're going to see later in the book of Daniel where he's praying. He reads the prophecies of Jeremiah. How he got those?
He's up in the,
They're about the same time, but he's over here in Babylon. Jeremiah's over here in Jerusalem. Now they may have known each other because Jeremiah lives through the attacks in Jerusalem and so forth. Here, write the book of Jeremiah and Lamentation. But and I'm not real sure when that prophecy was made, where Jeremiah said that there'd be 70 years of captivity. And so Daniel reads that, and he doesn't calculate it. He says, "Whoa, we're at that." And so he prays.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but is it possible that being that, because it says Daniel was basically one of the royal family, part of the royal family in Jerusalem or Israel.
To some
So
extent,
he would have actually heard Jeremiah's prophecy. So he could have actually made copies of what.
perhaps at what point, and I'm trying to research for next week, but that specific prophecy was made. I don't remember. So it may have been made before Jerusalem was destroyed. Okay, it may have been made afterwards because Jeremiah continues to prophesy after that period, after the Daniel and his friends are exiled into Babylon. But so here, see the first wave at least go back to his homeland. He won't be part of that. Try to imagine yourself. You've been wrenched from your home. You've seen your family killed. Your king, your president, whatever you want to call him. You've seen his family murdered, and then his eyes are taken out. He's blinded. So your country is stripped of its autonomy. Your family perhaps is dead. You're pulled away from all that. Now you're an old man. You see people returning to your homeland, but you're not part of it. And I don't think, as we get through this, and then we're going to find that Daniel never lost his love for his homeland. You remember that what gets him in trouble is that he's in front of his open window praying in the direction of Jerusalem. And he hasn't forgotten the old habits. He hasn't forgotten his upbringing, so to speak. But here, sir, at least two Babylonian kings. Nebuchadnezzar is the second king of Babylon. There's no indication that he ever served under Nebuchadnezzar. He served under Nebuchadnezzar and his grandson. Now, after Nebuchadnezzar dies, his son Evil-Merodach becomes king. Didn't last too long. He's assassinated. At some point, Nabonidus, I think the son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar, becomes king. And then Belshazzar. We're going to see Belshazzar in a couple of chapters. He's the one that had the drunken party and the handwriting on the wall comes in. We know that he served directly under Nebuchadnezzar and to some extent under Belshazzar. It's confusing because Daniel was given the name Belteshazzar. There's a T-E in
It's
there.
very confusing.
Yeah, whereas Belshazzar and Belshazzar. So
The
it's still the
70
same.
years happened in Daniel, Jeremiah 25, 10 and 11, the one I was studying stated.
So he might have been aware of that. So he lives at, if he was a eunuch, and some believe he was, some believe he wasn't. I don't think there's any mention of children in this part of the Old Testament that I'm aware of, but he's exiled from home. Everybody's left behind. His friends, his school, let's say, his family, everybody. And so when people go back, he would rejoice that he wouldn't be part of it. He would, as far as we know, die in Babylon. Babylon becomes, and we saw this in the book of Revelation, becomes the symbol of rebellion against God. It starts in Genesis with the Tower of Babel. From then on, throughout into the New Testament, It's seen as the enemy of God. Now, the city of Babylon will be destroyed eventually. But the symbol that Babylon represents, that becomes a symbol of rebellion against God, God's primary opponent, and God's people. Let's look at this second chapter. We've got about 10 minutes. Let's look at the first 11 verses. Can you read them?
Sure.
Ooh, right, okay.
I was being looking through the Jeremiah. Thanks. I don't need a correct screen.
No.
Verse 11 verses.
1 through 11.
In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. So the king summoned magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Then the astrologers answered the king, May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. The king replied to the astrologers, This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble.
Okay, now stop there for a minute. Think about that. This ruler. What would you think of an American president who would come out with something like that?
That's
I'll have you cut into pieces, and I think the King James says something about your house will become a dunghill, a hill of crap. Okay? Yeah.
stinky.
Yeah, there's something wrong with this man. Continue reading.
But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Once more they replied, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it. The king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. The astrologers answered the king, There is no one on earth who can do what the king asked. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans.
Wow. So now imagine yourself in the shoes of these astrologers, enchanters, and whatever else.
I wouldn't want to be in their shoes.
A magician, enchanter, astrologer.
I often wondered if these got killed right away after all that.
They didn't. We'll see that. We won't see it tonight. I don't think we'll see it.
Well, I mean, I know that Daniel saves the others, but like with the way they were
Yeah,
stalling.
it seems to indicate later in the chapter that she died. I think that be happy about that. I don't know. They would be happy about that, but jealousy. So you're one of these three divisions: astrologer, magician, enchanter. And this king asks you something that no king has ever asked anybody before. Why would Nebuchadnezzar ask that in the first place? What do you
Because he
think?
doesn't trust them.
That, I think, is a primary reason. Strangely enough, a lot of writers don't touch on that. Some think he forgot the dream, which I've forgotten dreams. I'll wake up and it's a disturbing dream, and I'm disturbed, but I don't remember why I'm disturbed. Can't remember the dream. Doggone it anyway. I don't know if that's part of growing old or what. But,
Every dream I remember is just troubling. So.
Okay, maybe he forgot the dream. He doesn't want to admit that. Okay, the man's got a big ego, and people with big egos don't want people to think less of them usually. Okay.
I don't think he forgot. I think he just didn't trust him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wanted proof that they knew what they were doing.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if he forgot the
Or they
dream,
could
though,
prove that they could do what they were supposed to be doing.
There are instances in ancient history where kings did get dreams and would remember or whatever, and the information would be used against them.
And you have to think, okay, so you're high up in there, okay? You have to trust your life to everybody that you're surrounded with, okay? And, so he's testing them to see who he can trust.
Yeah,
That's the way I look at it.
I do too. I do too. There are instances, though, where dreams were used against the reigning monarch, and it's called coup to the throne. So I don't know what's going to the throne. But I think he's just interested. And possibly he's had other dreams, and they would give the interpretation. He probably wasn't even happy with that.
Or it was wrong.
Yeah. And it's kind of like up to this point, they're kind of like weathermen today. Forecast the weather, whether you're right or wrong, you get paid. Okay? So these fellas.
They get paid good too.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. And so these fellas, they're probably wrong at times, and boy, they get, their pension, they get everything else. Maybe the king's tired of it. I think you're right. I think he just doesn't trust them. He figures, well, if they can tell me what I dreamed, then maybe logically they'll give me the correct interpretation. Realize what they had dream books. Have you ever seen dream books? Yeah, today. Okay. I've seen a number in the market through the years. It tells you what the general interpretation of a dream would be. The Egyptians and the Babylonians both are famous for that. They've unearthed them in archaeology. And these books contain sample dreams or past dreams of people and how they were worked out. And so it gives them theoretically a key to interpret similar dreams in the future.
Ain't that like astrology?
Yeah. Astrology was the science of the era. Astronomy, most believe, came out of astrology. And they could forecast flares, or not solar flares, but eclipses, and a number of things. Not only these ones, but even in Central and South America, the Inca and Maya and stuff. The very well developed in that area, but it's astrology. There's still people who are supposed to be intelligent who believe in astrology. Supposedly, when President Reagan and his Alzheimer's or whatever really took hold, Nancy ran the country, they claim, and she did it through the astrology chart to some extent, what history tells us now. Maybe that's the liberals writing that fake history, I don't know. But she was...
Because Reagan was considered a Republican. So,
Oh, he was a very conservative
so,
Republican. Yeah.
anything to make a Christian look wrong.
Yeah. Amen to that, sis. You got that right. So I think, probably he doesn't trust them. They would consult their dream book. And they've got a leg to stand on here. Nobody's ever asked us to do that before. Well, I'm the king and I'm asking you now. I'm the emperor of this great empire. I'm asking you now. And guess what, boys? You don't do it, you're going to be chopped into pieces. And their homes are going to be destroyed. Does that seem like an unreasonable, harsh judgment? You think?
I guess it depends on how you're looking at it.
Whose shoes you're in?
Right. I mean, that too. But I mean, like, he's the king. So, like, his life is in all those around him in their hand. So, if he's trusting them with a dream and stuff, they could say anything, tell him he has to go to battle, and here put him in a suicide mission.
That would happen in other reigns, yeah.
So, I mean, really, when it comes down to it, like, if their intentions are evil, like, the way I think that he was looking at it is if they can't tell him the dream and they only want to interpret it, then they don't have what needs to be done to interpret it properly. So to him, that may be that they're just looking to.
Yeah, I think though, with that, I think he didn't think it through very well. Because even if I can tell you what your dream was, there's no guarantee I'm going to interpret it correctly.
True.
Okay? I might not like you, and like the food you give me or whatever. son over there, probably a better king. But yeah. So, but it generally seems harsh. But there are other instances in history where that happened. Darius the First executed a bunch of magi. Whether all the magi or not, I don't know at this time. It'd be a bit later than this fellow. Because one of them usurped the throne. He brought his army in, took the throne back, and just lost them all. Okay, however he did it, I don't know. Xerxes, a group of his engineers engineered a bridge that collapsed. So what's the penalty for a collapsed bridge? You engineers? Death. He killed them all. Okay.
Well, you make a bridge, if it collapses, 9 chances out of 10, it's like over a mountain or from mountain to mountain or from river, so I mean, that could kill you.
Yeah, especially if you can't swim or you have all this heavy jewelry and everything on.
If you're in the middle, are you really going to be able to swim to the other side, depending on how big it is? Like some of them, like you can't even see the other side of a river sometimes, or ocean, or whatever.
I'm not a strong swimmer. I told people, if we're out swimming and you go under, if I come after you, we're both going under. So you're on your own.
I can't. I can swim, but it's too hard on my lungs. I don't swim.
And then in the Bible, 1 Samuel, in fact, we're not going to read it. Chapter 22, verses 13 through 19. Remember, Saul wants to kill David, and David goes to Nob, the city of Nob, and the priest Ahimelech is there. And Ahimelech doesn't know there's a rift between the king and his faithful servant. David was the commander of his bodyguard. Okay, so David says, "Can you consult God for me?" And I had to leave the king's service early, hastily. His business was so important. He had a sword. That was sword of Goliath. That meant him to get killed. Well, that's a good one. I'm not bad that. So he helps him, not knowing that the king wants to kill him. And so Doeg the Edomite, Saul's commanders are surrounding him there, and he says, "Oh, you're wicked because you haven't told me where David's hiding. You know he's out to get me." And so an Edomite shows up. Doeg says, "Oh, I saw him at Nob, and the priest there helped him out." So calls the priest in, all his family, and says, "Such and such happened." And Ahithophel says, or Ahimelech, whatever his name was, "I didn't know there's a rift between you guys. He's your faithful servant, man. He's the man of your bodyguard. He leads the troops in the battle. Okay? I didn't know. I'm going to kill you and kill the whole family of priests." Okay? Because he was
Yeah, but his soldiers wouldn't. Doeg the Edomite is the one that actually did it.
Doeg, yeah. Wonderful fellow. Of course, he's a foreigner and a pagan. Saul didn't care. Okay? So it's a harsh sentence, but it's not unique in history. Is American business any better? Okay. If there's a downturn in your business, in your corporation, you lose a few dollars, a few million, boot him out. And his school of thought, the people who supported him, boot them out. Get some new people in here. Not quite as harsh. They live through it, and they usually get a severance pay. So, but these fellas, they weren't getting any severance pay, friends. Okay? Not at all. Okay, we're not going to go into the dream tonight, because it's lengthy. It covers the remainder of the chapter, and there's about 49 verses in that. Read that for next week. And this is one of the controversial portions of Daniel. The critics will tell you that it was written after the fact. Remember we mentioned that last week? The critics would say that the prophecies, this being one of them, were all written after the fact. It seems pretty plain though, what these symbols represent. But when you choose to accept that God can perform miracles, or that God knows the future, then you just can't accept the Bible as it is. You've got to re-explain it. And some of the theories are ridiculous. Okay? At least one of the theories even goes against what he said about the head of gold. But we'll look at that. And look, too, when you read this, note the humility of Daniel. He's going to say, King, there's nobody can do what you're asking, but there's a God in heaven. Okay? And then verse 2 later here say, and you know, God hasn't given me this interpretation because I'm any wiser than these other guys. These are the guys, at that point, they're hoping that he succeeds. Okay? I'm no wiser than they are at that point. You know, they might just chop your head off. But he says, God is given me. This is why God's given me the interpretation. Very humble man. He's brilliant. He's favored by God. And he's very humble. He realizes it's God and not him. Let's pray. Father, we thank you. We thank you, Lord, for being with us. The book of Daniel. Father, help us to understand, but with that understanding, to apply the truths of it in our lives of others, Lord. To be with us and bless us, we ask in Christ's name. Amen. Well, young Shauna, how are you doing?
There's some people that